It's great to be with you all. I've really loved this series on faith. It's been so good to dwell on faith, to dwell on the stories and the people in the Bible. And we're really coming to the end in chapter 11. And I think Andrew sent out the message to read Hebrews 11:32 to 40. If you haven't done that, maybe you could pause and do it now. What stood out for me when I was reading through these verses was in verse 33, it says, "Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised." And then in verse 39, it says, "These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised." They gained what was promised. None of them gained what was promised. And I've been really thinking about that. And I think that Elijah is a really good example of what it looks like to have a faith story where you receive such blessing and such goodness from God. And you also have to deal with the not yet. God's kingdom is not yet fully here, and heaven is not yet here, and we are not yet redeemed, and there is still stuff that we have to wrestle with daily. So that's what we're going to do today. One of the key storylines of the Bible is how God continually tried to give his people peace, to be in a good land under God's rule as one people. And the Israelites over and over again reject God's rule, mix with people from other lands who do not love or worship God. And as we come to 1 Kings, we see God's people divide into small Judah, who start with a good king, and they have a couple of bad kings and then have some good kings, and it kind of goes like that until the exile. And large Israel, who only have bad kings. And Elijah is sent as a prophet to Israel, specifically to King Ahab, to the bad kingdom. And it says about Ahab in chapter 17 of 1 Kings, "Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and he began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him." And this is who Elijah was sent to. Elijah is mostly with King Ahab until King Ahab dies, and then he's sent to another king, and Elijah's job is to prophesy that he will be killed by God for being so bad. And so Elijah is this good example of what it looks like to gain what is promised and also to not gain what is promised. So he is a prophet. God speaks to Elijah. He brings his word to him. He has this close relationship with God. God tells Elijah of the drought that is coming, and then he miraculously feeds him. First, ravens feed him, and then he takes him to a widow, and the widow feeds him and herself and her son with a tiny amount for many months. And then the widow's son gets sick and dies, and Elijah heals him, and he comes back to life. God heals him through Elijah. Elijah has this amazing moment with God where he gathers all of the bad people in Israel. They all come with their false prophets. They're crying out to their gods. They cannot get their gods to send fire onto an altar. Elijah douses the altar with water and fire comes. He gets to show God's power to unbelieving people. He then runs after Ahab, who is on a chariot, overtaking him with like super speedy strength and skill all of a sudden. God then appears to him in a storm. He's one of two people, Moses and Elijah. God appears to them in storms. And then we know that Elijah is taken up to heaven in a chariot. And the last time we see Elijah, he is on the mountain and Jesus is there with him and Moses is there with him. So he has these moments where he sees the power and the presence and the goodness and the care of God in his life. And we all have those moments, don't we? We all have stories to tell of God's goodness for us. But at the very same time, throughout the whole of his entire life, there are areas where he deeply knows he has not received what has been promised. He is sent to the bad kings who never repent, who never turn back to God. You know, we all know that struggle of witnessing over and over and of desperately praying for unsafe children or husbands and wives and loved ones and family and friends and not seeing the heart change. And Elijah is right there. There is famine in the land the whole time. Elijah would have seen and known of many dying separated from God. He is persecuted by Ahab and Jezebel almost the whole time his story is in the Bible. And he never sees God's people reunite with each other or return to God as a whole. And I think the story of Elijah shows us not only that power and presence and goodness of God, but also what it is to know deep discouragement and despair. I don't know about you, but I have often measured my faith by my circumstances. I became a Christian in a church that was quite health and wealth prosperity gospel. And I think a heritage of that means that my circumstances are often my measuring stick. Either I need more faith and I have to try harder at faith, or I get angry at God because I think, I'm reading my Bible, I'm coming to church, I'm serving, I'm doing the things I'm supposed to do. Why are my circumstances not changing? It's a very flawed way of thinking. And what is actually true is that our circumstances and feelings are not the best measure of faith or the best indicator of faith. If Elijah had used his circumstance as a measuring stick of God's goodness or the quality of his faith, he just would have succumbed to that despair. Hebrews 11 verse 1 says, "Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." And when Elijah was on Mount Carmel, in this amazing moment where God's power is about to come as fire from heaven to this altar, he prays this prayer: "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Elijah knew what he hoped for. He knew who God was and what the promise was, that the promise was God gathering these people into his kingdom under his rule together. And he knew that that was going to happen, even though it didn't happen in his lifetime. I think I really want to encourage you that if you are in a season of discouragement, if your circumstances remind you of the brokenness and sin of the world, if you feel like you're walking with God, but things are still not right and you are still frustrated, there is still meaningful, real, living faith active for you. We get to rest in the absolute faith that God is working. He will come back. There is great hope for today. God will move and act and be with us, and there is so much more promised that will come. Bless you. Take care.